So, okay, they are now working correctly. Off, can't believe that is happened. Anyways, let's continue where we left off. Here.
As expected, and drag and drop it on the UI menu object. Let the
Now we need a menu controller. Since I'll just create a simple one for now to get the basics of it. Create folder. I need a folder script. Create script controller. Okay. Huh. Let's go here. Script class cannot be found. Okay, it's compiling the script. Now let's open it up. Okay. So
we'll need a reference to our UI document, and as
delete all this. About your document underscore top. Okay.
store it in the awake method. Time to work on the play button. We'll need a button type for
Still awake. Document equals cat component UI document. Okay. Button button document root visual element Q button play button.
Then using the doc field, first we want to access the root visual element, and then use the generic Q method to query the actual button element. It requires us to pass the type of the element we want to get, in our case button, and optionally name. I recommend always using names, as this is a little bit more extensible and prevents you from nasty bugs once you add a new button and forget that the previous one also didn't have a name. And of course, we repeat that for all the buttons we have. Now let's handle clicking. We repeat that for all.
Let's see, private button settings button get button private to crafts. Okay. We'll also change it to print. We'll change this to exit. Exit. Render the credits button. Okay.
The buttons we have. Now let's handle clicking on the play button. To keep the code clean and hopefully more understandable, I am going to keep only the things directly related to what we create now. For example, here we have the reference to the button and a query to get it. Notice that I skipped even the part that grabs the UI document component. In order to handle clicks, we simply subscribe to the clicked event on the button. We'll need a method. Let's create one. As you see, the clicked event. Now let's handle clicking on the play button. To keep the code clean and hopefully more understandable, I am going to keep only the things directly related to what we create now. For example, here we have the reference to the button and a query to get it. Notice that I skipped even the part that grabs the UI document component. In order to handle clicks, let's create one. As you see, the
play button to left. See. Play button dot left plus equal same manager load same first level. Your same demo. Okay. Yeah, we have that same, so should be fine. Can we make startup? Demo ULP. Build profile. Okay, let's add the scene list. So plugin plan train demo ULP. Okay, that's gonna work out. No actions. And click. Okay, that's good.
does not require us to provide any parameters, so this is quite easy. We simply use the scene manager to load the first scene. This is all we need to have a working play button. The exit button is equally easy. You see, we only use different variables, different button name, and our exit button on clicked simply quits the application.
Okay, let's do settings button output plus equals method and we'll do credits clicked plus equal credit method Okay. Exit conflict plus equal exit plus equal application not code. Let's change the order. And change this order. Okay, refactor. Maybe like a correct format. I'll just use structural uh, shift. What's happening? Settings button on click. And new chat. Story added here. Picture variant. Yeah, YouTube chat is there. Oh, what is the issue? Is not my issue. Should probably rename this as well. Scripts, not this. Scripts. Yeah. Okay, let it load, let it compile. Okay, this is still an issue. I'm going to like force it. View, see, run, Let's forward step. Clearing forward. From output. Okay. Check. Therefore, not ever to work. Okay.
Mute button time. We need references to the icon sprites and one bool variable to know if we are muted or not. Then, of course, we also need the mute button, and as previously, we want to subscribe to the clicked event. In the mute button on clicked, we reverse the value of muted variable, and now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. We first grab the reference to background image style from the button style. Then we assign a new sprite using the background.fromSprite method. The value depends, of course, on the muted variable. Then we simply, of course, this won't mute anything everywhere is happening. I need to drag the sprites and whoa, the magic is happening. And when it comes to magic, it would be great if you could cast this a little early fun territory. Changing that. Okay, we are getting into a bit more fun territory. Changing the menu content dynamically. First, we need some references. Besides the button, as usually, we also need one for the button's wrapper. Then, as previously, we subscribe to the clicked event on the button. As a first step in our setting button on clicked, we simply clear the section. That will remove all existing buttons. We'll need a little bit more space, so let me hide some code one more time. We'll need two more variables, one for the UXML file with the template of the buttons, and then another one to keep the actual buttons created from that template. In the awake method, we set the settings buttons variable to cloned tree of the template. This literally will just create for us a visual element with all the settings buttons inside. Let's quickly create them. New UXML file named settings template, and nothing fancy inside. Wrapper with 3 fake buttons and a single actual one called back button. Of course, all of them have our nice and sexy menu button class. In order to use the existing style sheet, you simply click on our friend little plus icon and then select Add Existing USS. Let's save it and assign it to our script. Now, there are two more things we need to add in the script. First, after we clear the wrapper, we need to add to it the setting buttons. Easy. Of course, in our awake method, we also need to subscribe to the back button's clicked event. And then, whenever it is clicked, once again clear the wrapper and add the regular menu buttons to it. Okay.
It's got a lot more messy than I thought it would be. Okay, let all of this load. Let's do a simple one. Let's see, is it getting detected? Load. Click. Let's see, control. Exit. Oh, I have to add these buttons. Play button. Exit. Settings. Curate. Type. Oh, now let's try it now. Play button. Settings. Credits. And then exit. Let's go. Let's go. Okay. Still going. Okay. Okay, the animation's open. Hit play, it's loading. Another game. No, demo scene. I'll just load it up. Have it saved. Okay. Okay, now the buttons are working. Hmm. What happens if you just disable this? Yeah, completely gets hidden. Now I'm not showing any text. Log. Settings. Log credits like that. Let's not load anything, let's not do anything else. I just wanted to like enter simple debug. Slow down. That's taking so long to load. Okay, showing up correctly over there. Okay, buttons are all working. Now what should we work on next?
And store it in the awake method. Time to work on the play button. We'll need a As a first step in our setting button on click, we simply clear the section that
handles the localization itself when we're in.
What's this about?
Okay, so that's the basics of working with UI Builder and Runtime UI Toolkit. Now let's look at some more advanced use cases you might run into on a larger project and how you might want to navigate them. Let's suppose I'm deciding to localize my game into other languages. I'm using Unity's localization package, and so instead of displaying hard-coded text into these buttons here, I'd like them to reference my key and grab the localized value at runtime instead. One way to do this would be
Okay, there's a localization package. Yes. Unity local. That's something I definitely want. So install it.
to go into the code for the menu and adjust the text in here, but that doesn't scale super well, so I'd like it to be a bit more exposed than that. What we can actually do is build a custom UI component, like the ones you see down here, and expose some custom properties and behaviors for the component that will appear in our inspector here in the builder. So we can make a custom button component that, instead of taking a text input, takes a GUID input and automatically handles the localization itself when we're in play mode. This used to be a pretty painful process in previous versions of UI Toolkit, but as of 2023.2 onwards, it's much simpler and easier to do. So let's go ahead and create a new C# class here for our custom button. We'll inherit from the button class, but we'll set this class to partial, and add the UXML element attribute up here at the top of our class. This tells UI Toolkit that the C# class is an element that can be used in the UI builder. We'll then also create a string property for our key and add the UXML.
Okay, let's create a custom button. First, let's see if like it has the functionality already. View data key, data source. Let's see. Here Toolkit localization. Okay, there's an official tutorial. So it's surprising, but
the first thing we want to do is we want to actually create our localization settings. So we go to Edit, Project Settings, and we've got a localization tab here on the left now. And we haven't got any settings at the moment, so we click Create.
okay, project settings, localization, create.
That'll create a settings asset. So you only need one asset per project, and we're going to stick that into just the localization folder.
Okay, let's create a folder, localization. Save.
Just stick it anywhere, it doesn't really matter. So in here now we've got our settings. So we've got available locales. So that's the languages your game is going to support. So we call them locales because it's not just a language, but it can also include the region. So for example, if we wanted to add our languages to the game or locales, we click add locale, and then we've got a list of all of the supported ones we have, but we can also add ones that aren't in the list if we wanted to by clicking the add custom locale. So for example, if
Add local English. Yes. Okay, let's see what it is added here. Folder, locales.
we went to French, you can see we've got French, but then we've also got regional versions such as Canada.
Story. No French. Where? Another two. No. Organization, locales, slow. Yeah.
Mali and lots of other ones. So we could, if we wanted to, add translations for specific regions, and that's useful if, say, you have certain slang or certain words that might be interpreted differently in certain countries. And then we could maybe have general translations, so that you might fall back. So you'd have some very specifics for like maybe French Canada, and then you'd fall back to I have some translations already prepared. So we click add locales, and these are assets. Each locale is an asset, so we can save that somewhere. So I'm going to put it in here. I say it's now created 4 locale assets, and you can click on them and inspect them, and they have some information. They've got a name which you can customize. They've got a locale code, so we use a standardized way of referencing like languages or codes, which is the language hyphen and then the region. And if you go in the documentation, it'll tell you about the ISO standards, where that comes from. We've got this thing called culture info. So .NET has a lot of information about languages and cultures already in there, and we can pull that information out. And that means we've managed to match to us. So the last thing we should point out here is we've got this locale selectors. So when your application starts up at the beginning, it needs a way to know what language it's going to start up in, and that's what this is for. So you can, the way it works is you give it different methods to try, and it attempts each one from the top going down to the bottom until it succeeds. So for example here, it's going to check the command line to see if a user's maybe passed in an argument for a custom language, and we're not running with any command line arguments at the moment, so that would fail. So it would then try the next one, the system locale selector, which is a little bit more advanced. So I'm just going to go back to the slides. So the system locale selector uses is different depending on the platform. So for example, if it's running on iOS, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check your what's called the preferred language. So that is where you can click on an application and you can change the language just for that application instead of having sort of the operating system language. And Android has a similar feature. If that fails, say it's not been set or you're not on one of those platforms, then the next thing it does is check the system culture. So that is where .NET can tell you what the operating system language is. So it'll then check that. And when it does that, it'll also check to fallback. So for example, fallback from French currencies, and then it would this back here. So for our example, we're just going to use
default will be English.
as the startup, so we're going to remove these ones. And another one that's worth pointing out is there's different ones here. You can create custom ones as well. It's the player pref locale selector. So if we add that, if later on we change the language, then it will remember that change in the player preferences. So that next time you start the game, it will keep that language set. So there's already like a setting, a configuration in there for you. You don't have to create your own.
So just looking. English.
Or you could if you wanted to. So if we do that now, then if we change get the language like later on, and we start up again, it'll go to the language we had before. It won't keep resetting to English. So I'll close that now. There's some other settings that we might look at later on. Another useful one, just to quickly categorize, is project locale. That is more of an editor hint, so it tells it what language we're building the game in, and so at times when it doesn't know what language to display, it knows to fall back to this project locale because it knows that's the language I'm using as my default. So it's more of a hint, it doesn't do anything in the player. So we'll just set that, and then we'll
System database, as a database.
close that down. So we're going to open UI Builder now. So we're going to look at UI Toolkit. So we go window, UI Toolkit, UI Builder. I'm just going to dock that. So the first thing we want to do is add a label. So we've got a label, we now want to localize this label. So we need to give it some information, some localized data. So to do that, we can go to Window, Asset Management, Localization Tables. And this is our table.
Window localization tables.
It's got nothing in it at the moment because we haven't got any tables. So the first thing we want to do is create a string table. And a table is like a spreadsheet. Where you have your keys down the side and then you have each language across the top. And so it lets you put in all those translations. So we'll create a string table and we'll just call it my strings.
Strings.
And we have the option of what languages we want it to support. So we just leave it as default and we'll support them all. And you can add languages later on. You don't have to do it all up front. So we'll just save that and that will create several assets.
Localization strings. Title. Play. Button. Setting. I'll just give it as the credits. Insert.
Is how you're going to reference it. So it could just be the English word or the original translation, or you could have a naming convention. It's really up to you. So for example, a lot of people like to do like a naming system like this, ID hello, and I'll put the English in, the French, the Spanish, and I'm going to copy.
Okay, make it all caps. Sort. ID. Yeah. Title. Title. ID. Menu. Yeah. Game. Menu. Play. Settings. See credits. Search. The set credit.
And paste the Japanese because I haven't got a Japanese keyboard. So we've got our entry and we've got translations in there. So we'll close that down now. So we now want to connect that localized value to our
Text. Bind monitor localization. String. ID. And
so you can see it's the table name
binder.
/ and the entry name. And you can also filter once you start to get large tables, and it's useful to be able to filter it. So double click that, and now I can see it's telling me the default is English. It gets that from our project locale we set before. And then it's got the translated values, which we can have a look at as well. So we click add binding, and now it's been localized. So we can now switch that language. If we go to Window, Asset Management, Scene Controls, we get this little control here. So I'm just going to dock this up here.
Game title. Binder. String. Select. Game title. And settings. Probably do like a graphic and audio setting, but for later. And then string select settings, abandon, abandon stem. What, you can't see this? Yeah, looks like I'll have to make some changes for this. Well, credits, abandon. Exit, localization string, select into exit, abandon. Windows asset management, localization, sync control, okay, like automatically changes. Okay, that's very nice. Much better than writing extra
And it's
code
got
for it.
a language changer. So when I click French, you can see it's changed to French, Japanese, Spanish. So we can just scroll through those languages and we can preview them in the builder. So the next thing you'll probably want to do is you're going to want a different font per language. In this instance, it does support it, but we'll assume it doesn't, and we want to change to a different type of font. So we want to create a asset table. So window, asset management, localization table. So we're back to here again. So we've got our string table. Now we want to create a new table for assets. So we click new table collection. And we go asset table. And I'll just call this my assets. I'm just going to create that. And that'll create a lot of assets again, like it did for string table. I'll create it in there. So like before, we've got a spreadsheet view again. We click new entry. But this time, instead of strings, we've got little slots we can drag an asset into. And it can be any type of Unity asset. So I'm going to call this
Yeah.
a flag. No, not flag, I'm going to call it font. So now I've got some fonts that I got from Google. So the Google Noto Sans and the Japanese one. So I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to use this font for all languages except for Japanese. So I just drag and drop it in. Okay, and so now I've got Japanese there, and the rest are just going to use the normal Noto Sans. So I'll close that. If I go to my label now, I can go down to where the font is assigned, which
Follow my fonts. Text. Say scripts. Fonts.
the styles, text, font. I can right click, and like before, I can do add binding. And now I've got the option again to go in here, and I can change it to a localized font this time. So I click that. And the same as before, I'll select that entry I just added. So my
Then we can just select it and change. Right.
asset / ID font, and I can see the fonts that I've been assigned. So I could change it here if I needed to. Using that font, back to window, just call it from it. And what it's actually doing when we're dragging what's called the addressable assets, each of these assets, you set your gains. So you can use texture. Select entry. There's our flag. Select that. Add binding. And I'm also going to change it so that it scales to fit, so it doesn't distort it. So now we've got text, font, and an asset, and we can just switch between them. So I'm just going to save that. So I go back to our deck for a second. it across multiple bindings, we can take advantage of what's called a data source. So we can have a single source of the data that we bind to, and then we can have lots of users. And this means that it'll only have to do that lookup once, and it won't have, it helps with the performance. But it also means that if you want to change that font maybe for all of those assets, you don't have to go and change each binding, you can just change that data source. So we're going to do a little example now to show you how to do that. So we'll go back to Unity again. So I'm going to show you an example scene we got. So here we have a menu built in UI Toolkit. Originally this was a GUI demo, and then it was built in UI Toolkit as part of the UI Toolkit samples a few years ago. So I've taken that example. It's just a very simple menu. And we want to have the same font apply to all of these. So we don't really need to bind every single item. We just want to have a single binding that gets applied to all of them. So that can be done with a data source. So if I go into my scripts, I've got my data source. I'm going to open Visual Studio. So here's our data source. For most of this demonstration, we're not going to do a lot of coding because we want to show a no-code approach mainly, but I'm going to do a little bit here. But a lot of what I do through UI Builder can also be done through code. So we've got a scriptable object, so that will create an asset for us. And in this, we want to have a font that we're going to bind again. So we're not going to use a localized font to bind it, localized font, and we localized font into the menu. So I can click on here, open this in the builder. So if I click on the root, I can drag that data source into this slot here called data source. So I'll just go here and drag that in. So now that data source will get used by the DAP and any children. And then we can go and click on each of these. And there's actually a few ways to do this. You could set the font in the root and it will share it for all the children. But for this example, I'm going to treat each one individually. Because if we had, say, lots of different UIs, then it would work this way for it. You wouldn't have, or they're not all sharing the same parent. So it's for the example, we're going to ignore that parent for this bit. So if we go to each piece of text, we can click on the text font like earlier, add binding. But this time we're not going to change it. We're going to leave it as the default binding. I'm going to click here, and you'll see it's detected font from the data source. So we can just bind directly against that, and then it updates it. So I would just do that for each of them. Useful. Because you'll often only have a couple of fonts that you're using across maybe multiple UIs. So you put them into a data source, bind against that data source, and when that font needs to change, it'll only ever happen once, and only need to be looked up once, so you get some nice performance benefits there. So the next thing I want to talk about is pseudo localization. So we've got our UI here. We haven't done any translations yet, but it's still worth applying, like setting it up for localization, even though it's not been translated yet. And I want to show you why you might want to do that. And it's for a technique called pseudo localization. So pseudo localization is a way you can simulate translations. So there's a lot of information out there on, like, for example, if you translate from English to say German, a lot of words will expand and get bigger. And so you can take some of that data and you can try and simulate. So you don't necessarily have to translate the words. You can just apply what might it look like if this text gets a bit bigger, or if the fonts were changed. And you can use this technique to look for issues earlier on before you've had to do any translations. Not only that, but it can also look for areas where maybe you've missed localization. So for example, there's a technique where it will replace all of your text with, say, an underscore. And then if you look at your UI and you can still see some text, you know you've missed that, you haven't localized that area, so you can go fix those issues. So it's a good way of debugging and looking for localization issues early on. And so it's got a lot of different techniques, and the docs go into the details. So we'll have a look at how we could apply pseudo localization to this menu. So we'll go back to Unity. So here's our menu. First thing we're going to do is actually create some entries then for this in our localization table. So we go back to Asset Management, to Localization Tables, go to our string table, and we're going to add some entries. So we're going to add one called menu. Then we'll have menu. So if you don't have a translation, you get this error message that tells you can't find the translation. So we'll go to English again. You can go to continue. I'm just going to quickly go through each of these now and localize them. To say French, you can see they're all localized and they're all given as an error message saying it's missing. So now we want to apply pseudo localization, so I'm just going to save that. So to create a pseudo locale, we can go, it's an asset, so we go into localization. I'll put it in the same place as my other locales. So you go in, you right click, create, under localization, a pseudo locale. And then it's the same as the locale editor. You can change the name, the culture info. So when it does the pseudo localization, it'll take the translations for your chosen language. So here it's English, and then it will apply it on top. So you can pseudo localize different languages. It doesn't have to be just the source language. And in here, we've got two new options, the methods and the preview. So the preview shows what it would look like if we pseudo localize that bit of text. So here it's applying these methods. So it's got a thing called preserve tags. That's useful if you say have rich text or HTML and you don't want it to break the tags when it's pseudo localizing it. I'm just going to remove that because we're not using that at the moment. It's got the expander, so that's where it makes the text grow. And it doesn't just grow by the same amount, it applies some rules that you can define. So you can tell it, if it's a very small piece of text, grow by 200%. If it's large, then you'll only grow by maybe 30% because once the text gets really big, it doesn't change as much for some languages. So you can get this information from various sources. In the documentation, we reference where we got this from. So if you want to try that one. Then you can say what it does is basically generate random characters. And it puts them at the end or the start or both, so I'd say both. And you can configure the characters, so that by default, there's lots of stuff in there. You can just change it to a single character if you want. I'm going to get rid of the accent, so that changes all the characters to the...
Okay, I'm going to end stream here. I think I've reached a good stopping point for today. See you tomorrow, maybe in the morning.